Hey everybody, how you doing? Everybody feeling all right? Cool. I actually don't know if you're feeling all right or not. Maybe you're feeling like shit. That's not cool. Why'd I say it was cool? Anyway, let's take a look at a channel called Deflating Atheism. This is a video called There Is No Evidence for God, TM, the little trademark symbol, which has kind of become synonymous with, stupid shit that people say, basically like, oh, this is just an empty slogan at this point. So he's basically saying that when an atheist says, there is no evidence for God, that's just an empty piece of rhetoric that atheists have latched onto. It doesn't have any actual meaning, doesn't have any actual merit. And this is how, this is a video about how Christians should respond when atheists say such a preposterous fucking statement. Let's take a look.
A while back, a YouTube user asked me how to respond to an atheist who says, there is no evidence for God. This is important because there is no evidence for God is a shibboleth for new atheists.
Shibboleth? The fuck is a shibboleth? I'm going to look that up real quick. Hold on. Shibboleth, a custom, principle, or belief distinguishing a particular class or group of people, especially a long-standing one regarded as outmoded or no longer important. So you're saying that atheists regard the term there is no evidence for God as being outmoded and no longer important, or are you saying that you regard it as being outmoded and no longer important? Or do you say, you probably think it was never important because you're a Christian, right? So I don't know. Weird word choice, maybe. Maybe you should have gone with, something that was a little bit more widespread, a little bit more common in the vernacular. But whatever, it's fine. It's a fancy word. I like it. I appreciate a fancy word. You taught me a new word, so I guess that your video won't be a total waste of my time. That's cool. So let's keep going.
It's their version of jet fuel can't melt steel beams.
Yeah. Yeah. It's our version of jet fuel can't melt steel beams, because it's basically saying there's no evidence of God is basically the equivalent of a conspiracy theory. I mean, it's just totally preposterous.
Now, you should be familiar with apologetic arguments for God's existence, the Kalam argument, the contingency argument, the fine-tuning argument, etc., and you should know how to defend these against common objections. But please be aware of this.
I've seen you try to defend them against common objections. I've not really seen too much success in that department, but whatever.
If an atheist declares that there is no evidence for God and challenges you to convince him otherwise, and you take him up on this challenge, you've already lost. Yeah. The name of this game is There Is No Evidence for God, Prove Me Wrong, and it's a trap.
How's it a trap? There is no evidence for God. I mean, I wouldn't even say prove me wrong. I would just say there is no evidence for God. And if there is evidence for God, you should be able to just be like, no, actually, you're wrong. Here it is. Oh, I guess I was wrong. I apologize for my statement because I'm obviously incorrect.
See, you've placed him in a position where you could simply swat away any argument you provide by claiming it's been debunked. And when you get nowhere in trying to convince him, which you will because he's determined not to be convinced, he'll expect you to default back to his preferred supposition. There is no evidence for God.
Okay. So, you're saying that, atheists ask for evidence of God, and then you show them the evidence, and they're just so close-minded, like, this doesn't even count as evidence. Well, maybe it's because the evidence you show them isn't convincing, because usually when you ask a Christian for evidence of God, they just break out the Bible and say, the Bible, look at the Bible. Or they make one of the arguments you talked about earlier, the fine-tuning argument or something like that. But an argument is not the same thing as evidence. We weren't convinced of the laws of thermodynamics by a compelling argument. We were convinced by evidence. Weren't convinced of quantum reality by a convincing fucking argument or a soaring oratory. We were convinced by evidence. Weren't convinced of the Big Bang because it sounded cool. We were convinced by evidence. So, presenting an argument as if the argument itself is evidence, that doesn't work. Presenting a fucking book of ancient stories as if that's evidence doesn't work, because tons of cultures have mythologies. Tons of cultures have believed various things about various deities. that doesn't mean all of those deities are true. It just means that human beings have a predilection towards creating creation myths and explaining the world through the lens of all-powerful beings that hold our fates in their hands.
So it's important to identify the subterfuge and refuse
The subterfuge. Sorry, I shouldn't make fun of the way you talk. I apologize.
accepting any argument predicated on the atheist's own terms. So let's see this in action.
Yes, let's
The
do that.
atheist says,
You know, I would complain that you've portrayed the atheist as a fat fedora-wearing neckbeard. I understand that's actually a trilby. Whatever, it's still a fedora. They're all fedoras. Trilbies are fedoras. Just get over it. I would complain about that, but since I am a fat neckbeard and I do own some fedoras, I guess that I'm not the right person to bring forth that objection. Anyway.
there is no evidence for God.
That's how we talk. There is no evidence for God. Remember how I talk like that?
And you reply, I certainly disagree with that claim. Can you provide any reason why I should think there's no evidence for God?
Ah, the classic shifting of the burden of proof. That'll fucking solve it. All right, let me just stop you there for a second. 'Cause that's silly. Like, if I were to deny the evidence, if I were to say to a scientist or something, there's no evidence for the Big Bang, they wouldn't try to shift the burden of proof and be like, oh yeah, well, can you show me evidence that there's no evidence for the Big Bang? They wouldn't do that because that's stupid. That's shifting the burden of proof. You're the ones making a claim. You're claiming there's an all-powerful being that's controlling everything, that rules over us, and that we have to obey his edicts or we're going to wind up in hell. I don't know what you specifically believe because there's about 1 billion different flavors of Christianity, but that's the gist of it. If I went to a scientist and said, oh, there's no evidence of the Big Bang, they would just say, yes, there is. Here it is. And they'd present it to me, and I could choose to accept it or I could choose to reject it. But that's what they would do because they actually have evidence. The reason that you're trying to do this weird burden of proof shifting bit of sophistry is because you have no fucking evidence. If you had evidence, you wouldn't have to cook up something silly like this.
He makes a claim, you ask him why you should believe it. This is the very essence of the burden of proof.
No,
Note well,
it's not.
however, the word we're not using here. Evidence.
Yeah, you shouldn't use that word, because that's what you don't have.
Asking an atheist for evidence of a lack of evidence is a perfectly reasonable application of the burden of proof.
No, it's
but
not.
Atheists struggle
How is that a... That's like, okay, we take any random example. Like, I can say, I'm drinking Red Bull. I think that Red Bull literally does give me wings. There's tons of evidence all over the television. You see these cartoon characters drinking Red Bull, and then they sprout wings, and they can fly. So I think Red Bull does give you wings. And you say, well, there's no evidence that that's actually true. And I say, oh, yeah, well, prove that there's no evidence. Prove it. You can't prove that. You can't prove a fucking negative. Everyone knows that. This is just silly stuff. I mean, this is just fucking Christian apologetics, Christianity versus atheism 101 type shit.
abstract thinking, and this meta-evidential burden of proof, laying bare, will cause their brains to short-circuit.
I'm not short-circuiting. I'm just pointing out that what you're saying doesn't make any sense. Okay.
Either flatten a nested demand for evidences into a demand for evidence of God's non-existence, a demand that they naturally will shrug off, or they'll simply call it stupid or retarded.
Just because it is. I mean, it is stupid and retarded. What do you want me to say? Do you want me... Like, atheists are supposed to be like, wow, I never thought of that. What an impressive argument. The way that you shift the burden of proof onto me unjustifiably is just fucking brilliant. God damn, you're smart. What? No, it's stupid. It's retarded.
Since it involves actual thinking, which is tricky.
Actual thinking.
Can you provide evidence of no evidence? I suspect it's impossible myself.
Well then, all right, so you admit that, I mean, like, you're basically admitting here that it's dumb. Can you provide evidence for no evidence? I suspect it's impossible. So basically, your response to an atheist who asks you to provide evidence of something that you believe in is to give them an impossible task. A task that's impossible by your own admission. Okay.
But if proving your claim is impossible, that only means that you shouldn't make the claim to begin with. Only in bizarro atheist world does the impossibility of proving a claim become a justification for making it.
Okay, so apparently there's a few concepts that need to be explained to you. Like, probability is one. Falsifiability is another. Why am I blurry? Don't make me blurry. Is this God's punishment for me questioning his wisdom? Falsifiability, like if you can't prove something, if there's no way to disprove something, then you shouldn't believe that thing. If there's no way to actually disprove something, like, because there's an infinite number of claims that you could make that can't be disproven. The common ones are like the teapot in the fucking sky or whatever. Oh, there's a big teapot or tea kettle or whatever, and it's just revolving around the earth. You can't disprove it. Santa Claus, you can't disprove it. There's tons of things you can't disprove. So something being impossible to disprove, that means you shouldn't believe it. Because things that are real can be disproven. Like let's go back to the Big Bang. We could find new evidence that calls the Big Bang into question. There are things that you would expect to see if the Big Bang were true, and if you don't see those things, then that calls it into question. So it is falsifiable. Things that are falsifiable are a lot more stable, a lot more sturdy than things that aren't falsifiable. And God is is one of infinite unfalsifiable hypotheses, okay?
Now, I should also note that atheists have an accumulated body of folk wisdom dedicated solely to trying to rationalize why they shouldn't have to prove their negative claims.
Maybe because, as you just said, it's impossible to prove a negative. You seem to understand that, so you're the one who seems like you're being a little bit unreasonable here.
These range from misapplications of the presumption of innocence and the null hypothesis to the claim that you can prove a negative,
right,
which is false.
You just said that, though. You just said you can't prove a negative. You just said a moment ago you can't prove a negative. Now you can? Make up your mind.
And wouldn't relieve them of the burden of proof even if it were true. Every bit of atheist folk wisdom on this topic is wrong, and I will deal with it at length in a future video. But for present purposes, we will route around this issue thusly.
All right, let's do
it. The atheist says, "You're asking me to prove a lack of evidence? That's stupid. Retarded. I'm an atheist, which means I never have to prove anything I say."
Oh, okay. The atheists are the ones that never have to prove anything they say. We're not making a claim. We're not making a claim. You say, there's a God. We say, okay, show us evidence. And you say, I don't have to show you shit. You're the ones who are making a claim without evidence. You can't just turn that around and fucking avoid that issue by saying, oh yeah, well, prove there is no God. How am I supposed to do that? Am I supposed to search every micron of existence? Even if I did, you would say, well, okay, well, God obviously exists somewhere beyond this existence. Okay, well, how am I supposed to look for that? All right, so here we go. If you're going to say that I have to show you evidence of the lack of evidence of God, then tell me how to do that. Tell me what evidence you would accept. Because I can tell you, I can sit here all day and tell you evidence of God that I'd accept, but you can't. Can you tell me one bit of evidence that you would accept that there is no evidence of God? I mean, it's actually self-evident that there's no evidence of God, because if there were evidence of God, you would just present it. You'd just be like, here you go, here it is. And we'd look at it and we'd say, okay, well, I guess this is pretty fucking solid. This is pretty solid evidence. All right. I guess maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there is a God of some kind. But you don't have it. So instead, you have to engage in this bullshit, runaround sophistry, shifting of the burden of proof, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, let's see what your Christian character says.
You say, fine then. If you refuse to provide any reason why I should think there is no evidence for God, I'll happily go on believing that there are perfectly valid reasons for believing in God.
Well, so you're going to continue to believe that there are perfectly valid reasons for believing in God, but you won't actually share any of them so that any scrutiny can be applied to them. Okay. So that's your answer to how to deal with this as a Christian apologist. That is stupid. That is retarded. Just saying that because something, yeah, it's labeled stupid and retarded because that's the accurate label that it fucking deserves. Okay? Just pointing out that atheists call that stupid that's not fucking anything for you to hang your hat on, because it is stupid. It is stupid. If it's not stupid, provide me evidence for how it's not stupid. And you can do that by telling me the evidence for God. Give me some solid fucking actually verifiable, measurable, falsifiable evidence for God's existence. Do that. That's all you got to do. If there's so much evidence for God, you should have no problem saying, here it is. Here you go, atheist. Have fun. But you can't do it. You can't do it.
At this point, the atheist will realize the folly of claiming that there is no evidence for God and will make a personal vow from that day forward never to make claims they can't possibly support. Ha 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 ha! In reality, they'll continue biting at your heels like a demented chihuahua with one asinine objection after the other, and we'll deal with some of these in the follow-up video, There Is No Evidence for God, Part 2!
Oh, Part 2! Yes! Yes, Part 2! All right. That was wretched. Maybe I'll take a look at Part 2, but Part 1, I gotta tell you, not really impressing the fuck out of me. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments down below. Let me know if you think that this guy has a point of some kind. I don't see how, but maybe someone out there can explain it to me. I didn't know what a shibboleth was, so maybe I'm not getting the point here.